November 14, 2004. 70 miles southwest of San Diego, California. Commander David Fravor couldn't hide his irritation as the radio crackled to life, interrupting what should have been a routine training exercise. The 18-year veteran fighter pilot, commanding officer of the Black Aces Strike Fighter Squadron VFA-41, had heard plenty of strange requests during his career, but this one was different. "We've got a real-world tasking for you," the voice from the USS Princeton transmitted, its tone suggesting something between confusion and concern. Senior Chief Operations Specialist Kevin Day, monitoring the SPY-1 radar system aboard the Aegis cruiser, had been tracking something impossible for the past 2 weeks. Objects appearing at 80,000 feet, then dropping to 20,000 feet in less than a second. No aircraft on Earth could do that. No aircraft should be able to do that. Fravor exchanged glances with his wingman, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, through the canopy of his FA-18F Super Hornet. The Super Hornet represented the pinnacle of American naval aviation in 2004. Twin General Electric F414 engines producing 22,000 pounds of thrust each. Advanced AN/APG-73 radar, capable of tracking dozens of targets simultaneously. A top speed of Mach 1.8, over 1,090 miles per hour. Maximum altitude of 50,000 feet. This $57 million fighter could outfly, outgun, and outmaneuver anything in the sky, or so they thought. Below them, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, its surface glittering in the clear afternoon sun. Perfect visibility, perfect flying weather, perfect conditions for what the Navy called a DACT mission, dissimilar air combat training, where pilots honed their skills against simulated adversaries. Fravor's flight of 4 Super Hornets, 2 single-seat FA-18Cs flown by his wingman, had launched from the USS Nimitz, expecting another day of mock combat. The Nimitz carrier strike group represented overwhelming American military power. The nuclear-powered supercarrier Nimitz herself, displacing 100,000 tons, carrying 85 aircraft and 6,000 personnel. The guided missile cruiser Princeton, bristling with Aegis combat systems and SPY-1 radar arrays that could track hundreds of targets from the ocean surface to the edge of space. Destroyers, frigates, submarines. Billions of dollars of military hardware crewed by the most highly trained personnel in the world. Senior Chief Day had been watching the anomalies since November 10th. The objects, whatever they were, appeared every day around the same location. They descended from altitudes where the air was too thin for conventional aircraft to operate, dropping to lower altitudes in ways that violated every law of physics Day understood. He'd reported it up the chain of command. Officers had reviewed the data. Technicians had checked and rechecked the systems. The radar wasn't malfunctioning. Something was out there. When Fravor received the tasking, his first reaction was skepticism mixed with amusement. In the ready room before the flight, pilots had joked about UFOs and little green men. The Black Aces were among the Navy's elite, veterans of combat operations over Iraq and Afghanistan. They'd faced surface-to-air missiles, enemy fighters, and every challenge modern warfare could throw at them. Whatever was showing up on Princeton's radar, it had a rational explanation. Probably a weather balloon, maybe some classified test aircraft nobody had bothered to tell the carrier group about. Vector 270, 50 miles, the Princeton controller directed. Merge plot 20,000 feet. Fravor turned his formation westward, climbing to 20,000 feet. The 4 Super Hornets moved in a combat spread formation, each aircraft positioned to provide mutual support while maintaining clear fields of fire. By-the-book tactics, refined through decades of naval aviation experience. They were hunting what the controller called a merge plot, a radar contact that had somehow appeared exactly where 2 other radar tracks had intersected moments before. As they approached the coordinates, Fravor's radar showed nothing. The ocean below appeared empty, except for normal shipping traffic. Whatever Princeton was tracking wasn't showing up on his fighter's systems. He was about to call off the intercept, ready to tell Day his radar gremlins had disappeared, when Lieutenant Commander Dietrich's voice came over the radio. "Sir, you seeing this?" Fravor looked down through his canopy at the ocean surface 20,000 feet below. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life, and transform him from a skeptic into the most credible witness to something that should not exist. The disturbance in the water caught Fravor's attention first. From 4 miles above the Pacific, He could see a section of ocean roughly the size of a Boeing 737 churning white with foam. Not the normal breaking waves of the open sea, but something underneath causing the surface to boil and froth. Cross-chop waves radiating outward in a perfectly circular pattern, as if something massive was hovering just beneath the surface, disturbing the water with an invisible force. But it was the object above the disturbance that made Fravor's breath catch in his throat, hovering, approximately 50 feet above the churning. Water was a craft unlike anything in his 18 years of flying experience. Smooth, white, oblong, about 40 feet long, roughly the size of his Super Hornet but shaped like an elongated Tic Tac breath mint. No wings, no tail, no cockpit, no exhaust plumes, no air distortion from jet engines, no rotor wash from helicopter blades, just a perfectly smooth white surface that seemed almost luminescent in the afternoon sun. What the hell is that? Fravor transmitted, his fighter pilot's clinical training momentarily abandoned. Dietrich, flying off his wing, could only confirm what he was seeing. 2 Super Hornets, 4 of the most experienced pilots in the United States Navy, staring at something that violated every principle of aerodynamics they'd learned at the Naval Academy and in years of advanced flight training. The object wasn't stationary. It moved erratically above the water, but not like any aircraft Fravor had ever tracked. No banking, no pitching, no rotation around any visible axis. It simply moved from point to point, shifting position instantaneously, like a hockey puck gliding on frictionless ice. One moment hovering over one section of the disturbance, the next moment 20 feet to the left, with no acceleration or deceleration visible between positions. Fravor's training took over. Unknown aircraft in restricted military airspace required investigation and identification. He pushed his stick forward, beginning a descending spiral toward the object from 20,000 feet. The Super Hornet's engines responded instantly, the twin turbofans providing the power that made this fighter one of the most capable in the world. At this altitude and speed, Fravor's aircraft could sustain 7.5 G turns, execute combat maneuvers that would leave most pilots unconscious, and accelerate from subsonic to supersonic speeds in seconds. The white object continued its strange hovering dance above the water, apparently unaware or unconcerned with the 2 advanced fighter jets spiraling down toward it. Fravor descended through 15,000 feet, then 10,000, bringing his Super Hornet into a tighter spiral to maintain visual contact. The object remained stationary, or as stationary as its erratic movements allowed. In the back seat, Fravor's weapons systems officer was trying unsuccessfully to lock the aircraft's sophisticated AN/APG-73 radar onto the target. The system, capable of tracking cruise missiles at over 100 miles, couldn't establish a lock on the object less than 2 miles away. The radar return kept breaking up, as if the object was somehow absorbing or deflecting the electromagnetic energy. At 8,000 feet, Fravor made a decision that would define the rest of his naval career. He leveled his wings and pointed his Super Hornet directly at the object, executing what fighter pilots call a nose-on approach. Not aggressive, not a weapons pass, but a clear statement of presence and authority. The international language of military aviation. I see you. Identify yourself. The Tic Tac's response was immediate and impossible. The object, which had been hovering erratically above the water, suddenly oriented itself toward Fravor's approaching fighter. Not turning, not rotating, simply reorienting its longitudinal axis to point directly at the Super Hornet. Like it was aware, like it was watching, like it was making a decision. What happened next occurred so fast that Fravor's mind struggled to process it. The object began moving toward him, climbing to meet his fighter in what appeared to be a mirror maneuver. As Fravor descended in his spiral, the Tic Tac ascended in a perfect counter-spiral, matching his movements with impossible precision. "It's coming up to meet me," Fravor transmitted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his system. The 2 craft, one representing the pinnacle of human aerospace engineering, the other representing something beyond human understanding, closed on each other at a combined speed of over 300 miles per hour. Fravor could see the object clearly now through his heads-up display, close enough to make out details on its perfectly smooth surface. No panel lines, no rivets, no markings, no visible means of propulsion, just smooth white impossible. The two objects rushed toward each other at a closure rate of over 300 miles per hour. Fravor, descending through 5,000 feet in his combat spiral, watched the white Tic Tac climb toward him in what appeared to be a deliberate intercept course. For a moment it seemed like the object was playing with him, mirroring his maneuvers like a predator, sizing up potential prey. At approximately 3,000 feet of separation, Fravor made a tactical decision. He broke off his spiral descent and pulled his Super Hornet into a hard turn, attempting to get behind the object and establish an advantageous position. Standard fighter tactics refined through decades of air combat experience. Get on your opponent's 6 o'clock position, establish a weapon solution, maintain the advantage. The Tic Tac responded instantly. As Fravor's fighter rolled into the turn, pulling nearly 6 Gs, the object didn't turn to follow or evade. It simply vanished from its position and reappeared directly in Fravor's new flight path, as if it had anticipated his maneuver before he'd even executed it. The movement wasn't fast, it was instantaneous. One moment hovering at point A, the next moment occupying point B. With no visible transit time between positions, did you see that? Fravor called to Dietrich, his voice betraying the first hints of genuine concern. In 18 years of flying, including combat missions over Iraq, he'd never seen anything move like this. Fravor attempted another maneuver, pushing his throttles forward and pulling into a climbing turn. The Super Hornet's twin engines, producing 44,000 pounds of combined thrust, roared in response. At this power setting, the fighter could climb at over 40,000 feet per minute. Faster than a rifle bullet travels horizontally, the Tic Tac matched him effortlessly. Every turn Fravor executed, every altitude change, every speed variation, the object anticipated and countered. It wasn't reacting to his movements. It was predicting them, positioning itself to maintain whatever geometry it desired. The white craft remained slightly below and ahead of Fravor's fighter, hovering in what fighter pilots call the control position, the optimal location for a weapons engagement. But the Tic Tac had no visible weapons, no missile rails, no gun ports, nothing that suggested hostile intent beyond its impossible maneuvering and apparent control of the engagement. Fravor tried one more time, executing a vertical displacement maneuver that combined a barrel roll with a sudden altitude change. The Super Hornet, stressed to its limits, performed exactly as designed. The fly-by-wire flight control system processed Fravor's inputs through multiple computers, adjusting control surfaces 100 times per second to maintain optimal performance. The Tic Tac didn't follow the maneuver. It didn't need to. While Fravor's Super Hornet was still completing its role, still fighting against momentum and gravity and the physical laws that governed conventional flight, the object simply disappeared. Not gradually, not with any visible acceleration, it was simply gone. One instant hovering in Fravor's field of view, the next instant empty sky. Where did it go? Dietrich's voice came over the radio, her own disbelief evident. For several seconds, Fravor scanned the sky, searching for any sign of the white object. His radar showed nothing. Visual contact was lost. The ocean below was empty, except for the slowly dissipating disturbance in the water, the cross-chop waves already fading as whatever had caused them departed. Then the radio transmission from the USS Princeton that would define the impossible nature of what they'd encountered. "Sir, you're not going to believe this. The object just appeared at your cap point." The cap point, Combat Air Patrol Point, was their predetermined rendezvous location 60 miles away. The coordinates where they were supposed to meet after completing the training exercise. A location transmitted over encrypted military frequencies that should have been secure. Fravor did the mathematics instantly in his head. 60 nautical miles in perhaps 10 seconds. That translated to approximately 21,600 miles per hour, over 30 times the speed of sound, faster than any aircraft, missile, or spacecraft had ever traveled in Earth's atmosphere. The Super Hornet's maximum speed was Mach 1.8, roughly 1,190 miles per hour. At full afterburner, burning fuel at a catastrophic rate, Fravor's fighter would take over 3 minutes to cover the same distance the Tic Tac had traversed in seconds, and it had done so without creating a sonic boom, without generating the massive heat signature that hypersonic flight would produce, without leaving any radar trail between its departure point and arrival location. It had simply dematerialized in one position and rematerialized in another, as if the intervening space didn't matter. It knew where we were going, Fravor transmitted, his voice quiet now, the full implications settling over him like a cold fog. The object hadn't just outmaneuvered them. It had demonstrated knowledge of their classified flight plan, executed physics-defying propulsion, and done so with what appeared to be casual ease. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound by the same rules that governed every aircraft in humanity's arsenal. Aboard the USS Princeton, Senior Chief Kevin Day stared at his SY-1 radar display with a mixture of frustration and growing unease. The Aegis combat system, designed to track and engage hundreds of incoming threats simultaneously, was performing flawlessly. The problem wasn't the technology, it was what the technology was showing him. For the past 2 weeks, Day had watched these objects appear on his screens with disturbing regularity. They would materialize at approximately 80,000 feet, an altitude where the air was too thin for conventional aircraft to generate lift, where only specialized reconnaissance planes and spacecraft operated. Then, without warning, they would plummet to 20,000 feet in less than a second. The radar calculations showed descent rates exceeding 100,000 feet per minute. Nothing made by human hands could survive such acceleration. Day had served in the Navy for 17 years, specializing in air defense systems. He knew what radar anomalies looked like: birds, weather phenomena, system glitches. This wasn't that. These returns were solid, consistent, and moving with purposeful precision. When Fravor reported visual contact, Day felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread. He wasn't seeing ghosts on his radar. Something was actually out there. Now, watching the object reappear at the CAPI point 60 miles from Fravor's location, Day witnessed something that made his blood run cold. The radar track didn't show acceleration between points. It showed instantaneous displacement. One frame the object was with Fravor, the next frame it was at the cap point with nothing in between. As if it had teleported. Range to target 40 miles, Day transmitted to the incoming flight, holding steady at 20,000 feet. No transponder. No identification. Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood, leading the second element of Super Hornets that had launched after Fravor's initial contact, pushed his throttles forward. Unlike Fravor's fighter configured for air-to-air training, Underwood's FA-18 carried the FLIR pod, advanced targeting forward-looking infrared. A sophisticated system that combined infrared imaging with electro-optical sensors, designed to find and track targets that conventional radar might miss. "I've got a contact," Underwood transmitted, his radar finally painting the object that had eluded Fravor's systems. Bearing 270-20 miles, no altitude information. The FLIR pod swiveled, its infrared sensors searching for the heat signature that every aircraft in the sky produced. Jet engines burned at thousands of degrees. Even gliders generated friction heat from moving through the atmosphere. Everything flying left a thermal footprint. The Tic Tac showed nothing. Underwood's display showed the object clearly in visible light, a white oblong shape moving against the blue Pacific sky. But the infrared view was blank. The object wasn't emitting heat. It wasn't even reflecting ambient thermal radiation properly. It appeared as a cold void against the warmer ocean background, violating basic thermodynamics. "I'm getting intermittent lock," Underwood reported, his weapon system struggling to maintain target tracking. The sophisticated fire control computer, designed to calculate intercept solutions for targets moving at supersonic speeds, couldn't establish a stable firing solution. The object's movements were too erratic, too unpredictable for the algorithms. The FLIR footage, later analyzed by Navy intelligence and eventually leaked to the public in 2017, captured what Underwood was seeing. The Tic Tac moving from left to right across his field of view, rotating slightly but showing no control surfaces, no exhaust, no wings. The targeting box struggling to maintain lock, flickering on and off as the computer tried to comprehend what it was tracking. "It's aware of us," Underwood transmitted, watching the object's behavior change as he approached. The Tic Tac began executing what appeared to be evasive maneuvers, though calling them evasive didn't capture the strangeness of the movements. The object didn't bank or turn like an aircraft. It simply changed vectors instantaneously, moving in directions that required no consideration for momentum or inertia. Back on the Princeton, Day was observing something even more disturbing. His radar system, capable of burning through the most sophisticated electronic countermeasures, was being actively interfered with. Not jammed in the conventional sense, the signals weren't being blocked or overwhelmed. They were being manipulated. "The returns are dancing," Day told his supervisor, pointing at the display. "It's like it's playing with our radar, showing us what it wants us to see." Multiple radar contacts were appearing and disappearing around the primary target, ghost images that seemed designed to confuse and overwhelm the tracking systems. But these weren't random electronic noise. They moved in coordinated patterns, as if controlled by a single intelligence. Lieutenant Kevin Voorhis, another radar operator aboard the Princeton, was recording the raw data feeds on specialized drives, knowing that what they were witnessing needed documentation beyond the standard logs. The tracks, the speeds, the impossibly tight turns, all of it was being captured in digital format that would later be confiscated by personnel who arrived via helicopter, refusing to identify which agency they represented. "I've got him at 50 miles, then 40, then back to 50, Voorhis reported, watching the object apparently moving backward and forward across vast distances without traversing the space between. The system can't be right, but multiple systems were all showing the same impossible data. The Spyway-1 radar, Underwood's fighter radar, the FLIR pod, visual confirmation from multiple trained observers, all reporting an object that defied every known principle of flight. The FA-18F Super Hornet represented the culmination of nearly a century of aviation development. From the Wright brothers' first 12-second flight in 1903 to this advanced fighter in 2004, human aerospace engineering had achieved remarkable feats. The Super Hornet could accelerate from 0 to 600 miles per hour in under a minute. It could pull 7.5 G maneuvers that pressed pilots into their seats with force equivalent to 7.5 times their body weight. Its twin engines produced enough thrust to lift the 66,000-pound aircraft vertically if necessary. Yet against the Tic Tac, America's most advanced carrier-based fighter was completely outmatched. Commander Fravor, back aboard the Nimitz after his encounter, sat with the ship's intelligence officers trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. The mathematics were straightforward and horrifying. If the object truly traveled 60 nautical miles in 10 seconds, it had achieved speeds approaching 21,600 miles per hour, Mach 28 at sea level. For comparison, the space shuttle re-entering Earth's atmosphere traveled at approximately Mach 25. And it required massive heat-resistant tiles to prevent incineration. The Tic Tac showed no heat signature, no sonic boom, no visible means of propulsion. Captain Smith, the Nimitz's air wing commander with over 4,000 flight hours, reviewed the data with growing disbelief. "The G-forces alone should have turned this thing into a fireball," he explained to Fravor. "At those acceleration rates, you're looking at forces exceeding 700 Gs. The human body blacks out at 9 Gs. At 20 Gs, your organs rupture. At 50 Gs, you're essentially liquefied. At 700 Gs, whatever material this thing is made from would need to withstand stresses that exceed anything in our materials science. The Super Hornet's airframe was stressed to handle 7.5 Gs, with an ultimate load factor of 11.25 Gs before catastrophic structural failure. Even unmanned aircraft, freed from the limitations of human pilots, rarely exceeded 20 G maneuvers. The Tic Tac had demonstrated acceleration that was literally off the charts. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist who later analyzed the FLIR footage, calculated the object's performance specifications based on the recorded movements. The instantaneous acceleration from hover to departure velocity would require energy output equivalent to a nuclear reactor, he concluded. And that's just for the movement. The fact that it generated no sonic boom suggests it was somehow manipulating the air around it, preventing the formation of shock waves. The sonic boom problem was perhaps the most inexplicable aspect. When an object travels faster than sound, approximately 767 miles per hour at sea level, it creates a pressure wave that manifests as a thunderous boom. The Concorde supersonic airliner couldn't fly over populated areas because its sonic boom shattered windows. Military jets breaking the sound barrier produced booms heard for miles. The Tic Tac, moving at speeds exceeding Mach 28 according to radar data, produced no sonic boom whatsoever. It was as if the object existed in a bubble of altered physics, where the normal rules of aerodynamics simply didn't apply. Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, in her debriefing, focused on the object's apparent awareness. It wasn't reacting to us, she explained. It was anticipating us. Every maneuver Commander Fravor executed, the object had already positioned itself for the counter. That suggests either incredibly advanced sensors that could predict our movements, or something even more disturbing. It was reading our intentions. The radar jamming capabilities observed by the Princeton's crew suggested electronic warfare sophistication beyond anything in the U.S. military's arsenal. The SPY-1 radar system was specifically designed to resist jamming, using frequency hopping and advanced signal processing to maintain lock-on targets even in hostile electronic environments. Yet the Tic Tac had manipulated these systems effortlessly, creating ghost images and breaking radar locks at will. Gary Voorhis, the petty officer who maintained the Princeton's electronic systems, later testified that the radar recordings were confiscated by unknown personnel shortly after the incident. They took everything, he recalled. The hard drives, the backup tapes, even the maintenance logs. Men in plain clothes showed up, didn't identify themselves, and left with all the physical evidence. The thermal signature issue baffled propulsion experts. Dr. Paul March, a physicist working on advanced propulsion concepts at NASA, reviewed the FLIR data showing the object as a cold void rather than a heat source. Everything that moves through atmosphere generates friction heat, he explained. Even a falling meteor heats up. For this object to show no thermal signature while moving at reported speeds suggests one of two possibilities. Either it's using some form of field propulsion that eliminates air friction entirely, or it's actively cooling its surface through a process we don't understand. The implications went beyond mere technological superiority. What Fravor and his fellow pilots had encountered represented a complete paradigm shift in physics. The object demonstrated capabilities that violated conservation of momentum. Thermodynamics and material science as humanity understood them. Commander Fravor, a pragmatic fighter pilot trained to assess threats and respond accordingly, reached a disturbing conclusion in his debriefing. Whatever this was, it wasn't ours. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't Chinese. Their technology is decades behind ours in aviation. This wasn't a matter of being 10 years ahead or even 50 years ahead. This was fundamentally different technology operating on principles we don't comprehend. Within hours of the Nimitz encounters, the official machinery of denial began grinding into motion. But unlike the classic government cover-up of popular imagination, this wasn't about hiding the truth. It was about an institution simply unable to process what the truth meant. Commander Fravor's after-action report landed on the desk of Rear Admiral Matthews, the strike group commander, who read it with visible skepticism. An 18-year veteran, a decorated combat pilot, a squadron commander reporting an object that violated physics. Matthews' initial response was to order drug testing for the entire air wing. The tests came back clean. The FLIR footage captured by Lieutenant Commander Underwood was classified immediately. Not because it showed something the Navy wanted to hide, but because nobody knew what classification level to assign something this inexplicable. The footage sat in a safe aboard the Nimitz, viewed by a handful of officers who uniformly decided it was above their pay grade to determine what happened next. Gary Voorhis watched men in civilian clothes arrive via helicopter 2 days after the incident. They carried official credentials but refused to identify their agency. "I need all the data drives," their leader stated flatly, presenting authorization signed by someone whose name Voorhis didn't recognize. Within 30 minutes, every hard drive containing radar data from November 14th disappeared. The backup tapes followed. Even the handwritten log entries were photocopied and confiscated. "What should I put in the maintenance logs?" Voorhis asked. "Nothing. Routine maintenance. Standard procedure." Petty Officer Patrick Hughes, who had been present during the confiscation, later recalled the atmosphere. It wasn't threatening. They weren't men in black trying to silence us. They were bureaucrats following orders, collecting evidence of something that scared the hell out of somebody high up the chain of command. The official investigation, conducted by Naval Intelligence, produced a classified report that essentially concluded unknown craft of unknown origin displaying unknown propulsion. The report acknowledged multiple credible witnesses, radar confirmation from multiple systems, and video documentation. Then it was filed away, classified secret, and forgotten. Commander Fravor returned to his squadron expecting some follow-up, some debrief from higher command, perhaps even a visit from scientists or engineers who might want to understand what his aircraft systems had recorded. Nothing came. When he mentioned the incident to other pilots, he was met with knowing smiles and dismissive comments about UFOs and alien visitors. The Navy's culture of rationalism and technical expertise had no framework for processing something this far outside normal experience. "I stopped talking about it," Fravor later admitted. "Not because I was ordered to. Nobody ever told me to keep quiet. I stopped because talking about it made me look crazy. I was a commander in the United States Navy, responsible for a fighter squadron, and I was describing something that sounded like science fiction. For 14 years, the Nimitz encounter existed in a strange limbo. It wasn't classified in the sense of being actively suppressed. The witnesses could legally discuss it if they chose. But it wasn't acknowledged either. The Navy neither confirmed nor denied that anything unusual had occurred. The data was locked away, the footage sat unwatched, and the pilots involved went on with their careers wondering if anyone would ever take them seriously. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Luis Elizondo, a career intelligence officer, had been running a small Pentagon program called AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Founded in 2007 at the urging of Senator Harry Reid, the program investigated reports of unidentified aerial phenomena encountered by military personnel. Elizondo had access to classified reports that revealed the Nimitz incident wasn't isolated. Similar encounters were occurring regularly, involving Navy pilots, Air Force personnel, and civilian air traffic controllers. The pattern was undeniable. Objects displaying impossible performance characteristics were appearing in restricted military airspace with increasing frequency. They showed apparent interest in Navy carrier groups and nuclear facilities. They demonstrated technological capabilities that suggested either a massive breakthrough in physics by an unknown nation or something even more disturbing. In October 2017, Elizondo resigned from the Pentagon in protest, frustrated by what he saw as institutional indifference to a genuine national security threat. His resignation letter, addressed to Secretary of Defense James Mattis, was blunt. "Why aren't we spending more time and effort on this issue? Bureaucratic challenges and inflexible mindsets continue to plague the seriously important subject." 2 months later, on December 16, 2017, the New York Times published an article that would change everything. Glowing auras and black money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program, revealed the existence of AATIP and included the declassified FLIR footage from the Nimitz encounter. The video, showing the Tic Tac rotating against the ocean background while Underwood's targeting system struggled to maintain lock, was released to the public for the first time. The response was immediate and divided. Skeptics dismissed it as camera artifacts or misidentified aircraft. Believers claimed vindication of decades of UFO sightings, but neither group could explain away the multiple trained observers, the radar data, or the physics-defying performance. Commander Fravor, now retired, found himself suddenly in demand. News organizations, podcasters, congressional staffers, everyone wanted to hear his story. Unlike previous UFO witnesses who could be dismissed as cranks or attention seekers, Fravor was unimpeachable. A Top Gun graduate, a commander who had led combat missions, a man with zero history of making outlandish claims.